Without further ado, Blake, I'm going to ask you, who's the fifth best receiving duo in the NFL?
Yeah, so this was probably one of the hardest. I guess this whole list was really hard, but I had DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett as my fifth best. So, um, this for me was tough because I was comparing them with the Vikings, and I originally had the Vikings, but for me, what put the Seahawks over the top was the fact that DK Metcalf is he is a star already, but I guess the way he's talked about in his career progressions, he has the athletic profile to be a top five receiver in the league. And he's already been incredible with Russ. I don't see him slowing down anytime soon. Russ still has one of the best deep balls. He is still so good down the field. And if they will have a new offensive scheme this year, and I think that'll definitely benefit them more because last year it got a little stale towards the end of the year and they slowed down a lot. But that I love DK, and then Tyler Lockett. I flip flop with him all the time on whether I really like him a lot or whether I think he's a little overrated. But for the most part, I think he's a really good connection with Russ, and that's the main thing. Like, if you talk about quarterback and receiver chemistry, like of all time, I think theirs is like got to be top 10 because for whatever reason they make some of the most incredible plays. I think did you see the play against the Cardinals? It was back of the end zone, and Russ is just running around every time Russ runs around the pocket, Lockett's ending up with the catch. It
What
is
about
work.
what about the Rams one 2 years ago when he rolled out to his left on Thursday Night Football? This is the one Next Gen Stats said had like a 2.4% or something chance of being completed. And he threw basically over a guy. It's a ridiculous throw rolling out to his left, and Tyler Lockett dragging both his feet. Yeah, unreal.
Yeah, so their just connection is insane. And so yeah, I think they're the fifth best. I think them and the Vikings are incredibly close. And we'll see how Justin Jefferson does this year, but if he does what he did last year and or improves on it, you might be able to flop him. But just because of how good DK Metcalf is, I think he's clearly a top 7-8 receiver in this league. And so yeah, that's why I have them at 5. But who did you have at 5?
So this one's going to be a little shocking because I think if you asked last year, I think most people would have this duo as unequivocally the best duo in the NFL. But I think that this duo didn't have the best season. Now it could be a little bit chemistry with quarterbacks, but they didn't have the best chemistry. And I'm going to go with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin battled injuries. Obviously, Mike Evans had another strong 1,000-yard season, but I think he had only like 1,006 yards receiving. Yep, 1,006 yards receiving. He obviously had 13 touchdowns, so he had a good receiving touchdown season. But here's where I kind of draw the distinction and why I'll get to them, Metcalf and Lockett above Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. I think Metcalf is better than both Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. So then it comes down to Lockett and what his impact is. And while I think Godwin had a good season for a guy that was hurt, I think Tyler Lockett had the best season of his career. He caught 100 passes for 1,054 yards and 10 touchdowns. Incredible season. I think what has hurt Tyler Lockett's statistical production in the past is the fact that Seattle hasn't been a team that's very true to throwing the football. They run the football a lot. I mean, one of the biggest analytical complaints about the Seattle offense over the last 5-6 years is that you have Russell Wilson and you run the ball on first down every time with Chris Carson, who's a good running back. But right. And so for that reason, I'm going to go with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin at 5. I think you have two really good receivers. But if we're ranking these receiving duos, especially based on what we saw most recently, which was last season, yes, they won the Super Bowl. Yes, Tom Brady had a great season with them and all of that. But individually speaking, I don't think Mike Evans is better than DK Metcalf, especially the DK Metcalf we saw last year. And I think that Tyler Lockett, based on at least last season and how he played, he vaulted himself to be right around in the same conversation as Chris Godwin. So to me, I'm going to have Seattle above these two guys. And that's why my fifth-ranked receiving duo is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Okay.
With Chris Godwin and Mike Evans.
Fair enough. Yeah, I had them 4, so I guess that kind of works perfectly. I think you brought up a great point. Like, if you would have asked this last year, you'd have had them as a top 2, at worst the 3rd. But yeah, I guess Godwin being hurt's kind of put a little damper in things. Mike Evans had a little injuries too, but I still think like about end of the day, what they did with Jameson and what they did with Tom was really impressive. Obviously, Mike Evans in the red zone is just a beast.
Unreal.
He is insane in the red zone. And then Godwin, just a technician. Obviously, his route running is special, and I think he's really underrated. No one really talks about Chris Godwin, and he kind of came on the scene in 2019 and really popped off. But he's a really, really good receiver, and them two combined is you get the little yin and yang of maybe Godwin's he's not dominating completely athletically, but he's more technically gifted, and then Mike Evans is 6'5" and got Johnny Manziel drafted in the first round, or part of the reason for that. But yeah, Mike Evans is a beast. He has, I think, 8 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons or something ridiculous.
It's 8. It's 8. He broke the record.
He broke Randy's record. Yeah, I mean, he's consistently 1,000 yards, and you can't really ask for much more than that. And I think it was weird too, like adjusting to playing with Tom, because if you remember the first half of the year, like there was a lot of miscommunication and mess ups, and they had a lot of mouths to feed in that offense. There's a lot of special guys, but these two still are some of the most talented, and that's why I have them at 4. But interesting to see how they've kind of dropped a little bit, even though I don't think they've gotten worse. Just Godwin was injured, and that's unfortunate.
So this is a perfect segue for me because I have DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, and so I can elaborate a bit more. Obviously, right, you touched on Mike Evans, right? Incredible football player. You want to talk about a guy that hasn't been talked about enough in his career? That's Mike Evans. Mike Evans has consistently been a top 10 receiver in the NFL since probably year 2, but because he plays for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and because he played on a team that's only relevance prior to Tom Brady was Jameis Winston having a 30-30 season, he didn't get talked about enough. But Mike Evans is a baller. You talked about Godwin. Godwin's amazing underneath, and like Metcalf and Lockett, they fit with each other perfectly because you have Mike Evans, who's the conventional outside receiver that's going to beat corners and stretch teams vertically, and then you have Chris Godwin, who's going to work underneath and work right under Mike Evans, and that's how DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett are. Except there's one big distinction on why I would put Seattle above. I talked about how I think DK Metcalf is already better than Mike Evans. I think the one thing that separates DK Metcalf is he's better after the catch than Mike Evans. He is crazy after the catch. When it comes to bringing him down, he's a physical runner, and his speed is special. To me, DK Metcalf is the closest thing we've ever seen to Andre Johnson since Andre Johnson. So, like, DK Metcalf is really, really special, and I think he's a top 6-7 receiver in the NFL. Mike Evans is a top 10 receiver in the NFL, but I think DK Metcalf is a little better. But what I did want to touch on is what I think separates Lockett from Godwin is I just think Lockett's more explosive down the field than Godwin. So they both kind of offer you the same thing underneath. I think Tom and Godwin did develop a connection last year.
They did at the end of the year. They were on at the end of the year.
Right. It was a little Edelman-Tom-esque, or it'll obviously nowhere close because Tom and Edelman had the connection that Russ and Lockett have. But, it was a really, really growing connection and all of that. Right. But I think what separates Lockett from Godwin is Lockett runs 4.35. He could truly be a deep threat, and he tracks the deep ball really, really well. Now, he worked underneath a lot last year, but I think how many times have we seen over the last 4 or 5 years the scramble drill with Russ when Doug Baldwin was there? Lockett was the down the field guy.
Lockett used that. Yeah, Lockett. That's actually probably my least favorite thing about playing the Seahawks is seeing Russell Wilson just run out the pocket, and somehow it was either Doug Baldwin or Tyler Lockett they'd always make a ridiculous catch. It was you just knew it was happening. It was I hated that.
Unreal, right? And so for that reason, I think that Lockett and Godwin are both somewhere around the top 15 to 20 receivers in the NFL. And before people get really shocked, because that's a lot of receivers, there's a lot of people you have to take into account, like the DJ Moores and the Calvin Ridleys and the Terry McLaurins and all those kinds of people. Where if you start listing names, like that's where these guys kind of end up fitting. But for me, it comes down to the fact that I think Metcalf is just a little better than Mike Evans at this point. I understand how consistent and good Mike Evans has been. I just think there's a little more pop to DK Metcalf. And so for that reason, I'm with you that 4 and 5 is Seattle and Tampa Bay, but I have Seattle above Tampa
Mm-hmm.
Bay.
That's fair. And I guess where my distinction's made is, yeah, Mike Evans is a little worse than Metcalf. I still would take Godwin over Lockett. In my mind, I really would. I like Godwin a lot, and I think what he did with Jameis was incredible. Now, of course, Jameis is obviously throwing a ton of passes, a lot of touchdowns, a lot of picks, a lot of yards, but he is still just he's really, really good. And I think the underneath stuff next year, after Tom gets a full offseason with Godwin and he doesn't get injured, I think he's gonna really put people on the map because even with the injuries, he was incredible last year. And there's just too many mouths to feed on the Buccaneers team. Anytime you have Antonio Brown as your third receiver, it starts to get a little bit unfair. And they have a lot of weapons, and Scotty Miller's taking touches from everyone, so it's a little tough. But yeah, I'm excited to see next year, and I guess we'll see how both of them do because clearly there's one theme I think with all these guys is they do have some of the best quarterbacks in the league, and it helps a lot when you have Russell Wilson, Tom Brady, and all these type of guys throwing to you.